Hey, welcome back. It's week 7 now. So this is about the middle of the course. The way things have been organized basically this week is sort of the very end of the first half. It's just we're already past the midterm, but it just worked out that way basically. So what we're doing this week is a little bit more with the concept of intentionality, which basically the first half is supposed to build up to, and we introduced that in week 5, I guess it was. The point and the significance of that. And this week, well, we continue with that, but also look at some critical perspectives on that. And that's supposed to kind of segue us into thinking about some broader questions about knowledge and experience and so on that would form the proper basis for feminism in the second half of the course. So basically, we have two texts this week. One is from Naomi Zack. The other is a second piece from Anna Carastathis. They're similar to an extent, but they're ultimately quite different in terms of way they point, basically. So in the case of Zack, basically, she's kind of useful. She provides a bit of a backstory, a bit of the history, some of the things that led up to the ideas that Crenshaw was presenting. So that's fairly useful to be reminded of that. And then she, and the Carastathis will be like this too, wants to be critical basically of the way it has been taken up and how that is to say the concept of intentionality, how it has been taken up and deployed within feminism. For Zack, basically thinks it just tends on the whole just to have kind of fragmenting or fragmentary consequences, that it just serves to help identify, maybe a seemingly endless series of new and different points of intersecting oppressions, each of which is kind of unique and irreducibly specific and so on. So it seems to just undermine the unity or the commonality or the kind of sameness that once upon a time people thought was there in terms of the concept or notion of women that would provide the basis and the unity for feminism. So Zack kind of wants to get that back. She tends to think that the concept of intentionality is not really going to help us do this, so she's going to propose doing something else, which is kind of going back to the idea that there is indeed something universal, something universally the same among all women, right? She's definitely going to say that the way this was approached earlier was definitely wrong. So, for example, where we have white middle-class feminists wrongly assuming that their specific experience was indeed universally true of all women, right? Certainly Zack doesn't want to do that. She thinks there could be a better way to approach the question of universality. She tends to think that the basic error, as she puts it, was to think in substantial terms. That's like thing-like terms, trying to identify some kind of like concrete essence intrinsic to women that would be true across the board. She thinks that's definitely going to be wrong. But her proposal, as you'll see coming toward the end of her piece, is to think in what she calls anti-substantial terms, which is basically to say relational terms, which she then also does in disjunctive terms, which means she kind of provides a definition, which is a series of, this or this or this, only one of which need be true of any individual to be counted or considered as a woman. Now, I'm not so big on this particular proposal. Have a look at it, see what you think of it, but it doesn't strike me necessarily as all that compelling. And that's in part just because it does seem to kind of walk away from some of the potential that definitely seemed to be there in the concept of intentionality. So when we turn to Carastathis, she does something different. I mean, the basis is fairly similar. She's quite critical generally of how the concept of intentionality has been taken up and used and understood, which she thinks is in a fairly superficial or shallow way. Although you also see she goes a little further in a latter part where she basically suggests that in a lot of cases it is kind of just used as a way for people to kind of feel good about themselves and make it look like they're saying something or even doing something about, for example, racism, even while they're not really doing that much. So she thinks it makes it, it's kind of a feel-good thing as well. But so generally she's quite critical of this, thinking that people never really got the basic critique or the the point of the critique that Crenshaw was getting at. Now, it may be that Crenshaw herself didn't express it well enough or something, who knows, but Carastathis' point is basically to kind of go back to Crenshaw, kind of recover what she was really getting at with that idea. So this is what she's talking about as a provisional concept. I mean, that's a term she takes from Crenshaw, but she just kind of develops it in more detail than perhaps Crenshaw herself actually did at the time. So the implications of this is basically that, we want to stop thinking that the notion of intersectionality is some sort of solution to a significant theoretical problem, and much more really just the expression of a question or of the need for a solution which we do not yet have. Right, so she wants to say, when she's talking about a provisional concept, it means, different things. It's definitely just provisional in a, really ordinary sense. It's very tentative, kind of just a beginning. It's just a starting point. But it has that more specific sense that it's a starting point that's supposed to kind of confuse us, actually. I think she uses the word like disorient. You get that a lot in philosophy. Sometimes we emphasize the fact that really you only really get anywhere out of a state of confusion. If you're not confused, well, then either you just have and know the truth of something, that happens, I suppose, but otherwise you're just kind of complacent and probably just stuck in your traditional assumptions and preconceptions. So that's what Carastathis is really trying to emphasize, that intersectionality should just really shake us out of those preconceptions and assumptions and really put us on a path to start fresh and really start thinking about it in an entirely new way, basically. So that's what she says, I think, toward the kind of point of departure. It's much more a beginning than an end. Too many people have thought that the concept itself was doing a whole bunch of work that was very useful and so on, whereas her perspective is that it really just signals or kind of flags an area where there's still a ton of work to do, and we really got to approach it in a very different way. So that's kind of what we do in the latter part of the course, when we go back to questions about experience and questions about knowledge and objectivity, trying to think, how could we, or what would it really mean to follow through more conscientiously, kind of more honestly, with the main implications of what Crenshaw was talking about in terms of intersectionality. So for now, I think there's the assignment on this. It'll probably just have to do with some of these points, so you can be thinking both about something maybe Zack says. Both articles that we have from Carastathis are probably very useful for that. So anyway, have a look at that. And in terms of the